Today, we're tackling a really critical challenge for any large organization: scaling leadership consistency across distributed contact center operations. How do you make sure your leaders are all on the same page when they're not even in the same building or maybe even the same country?
So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll define the problem and why having distributed teams makes it worse. Then, we'll look at why traditional training just doesn't cut it. From there, we'll explore a system-based solution, see how it works across different locations, figure out how to measure it, and finally, touch on the serious risks of getting this wrong.
All right, let's get right into the problem itself. It's something we call drift. And when your teams are spread out, this problem gets amplified. A lot. And to kick things off, here's a number that really puts this in perspective. According to research from Harvard Business Review, only 12% of skills from leadership training are consistently applied during daily operations. Just 12%. That highlights a huge gap between learning and doing.
And that gap has a name: execution drift. Think of it as a slow, quiet, unconscious process. It's not one person deciding to do things their own way. It's a gradual deviation from the standard across the board, creating this invisible chasm between the strategy you set and what actually happens on the floor.
This chart here illustrates that perfectly. The top line represents the organizational standards and expectations. That's the ideal, where you want everyone to be. The line below it, though, shows actual leadership behavior. You can see how over time it pulls further and further away from the standard. That growing gap is execution drift, and it's where performance variance really takes root.
So, what's actually driving this drift? Well, it comes down to four predictable human factors. There's fear, avoiding a tough conversation; overconfidence, when a leader thinks their own way is better than the standard; negative impressions, which is really about not wanting to ask for help or admit uncertainty; and finally, execution blindness, the simple inability to even see the drift happen.
Okay, so if we know what causes drift, why is it so hard to fix? Well, a big part of the answer lies in the limits of the way we've always done things, with traditional, facilitator-dependent training. And this is why. You've probably heard of the forgetting curve. Research shows that without systematic, ongoing reinforcement, people forget up to 70% of what they've learned within just a few days. That means all the great content from that one-off training session just evaporates.
This comparison table really makes the difference clear. On the left, you see facilitator-dependent training. It's episodic, it's based on knowledge, it relies on memory, and it leads to low behavior transfer. On the right, you have leadership execution systems. They're continuous, execution-based, habit-forming, and embedded right in the workflow, which leads to high behavioral consistency. It's a completely different architecture.
And this bar chart brings us right back to that 12% number. The first bar shows 100%. That represents all the knowledge a leader gets from training. But the second bar shows the tiny fraction of that knowledge, just 12%, that actually gets applied at work. That massive difference is the training application gap.
So if training alone isn't the answer, what is? We need to shift our thinking toward a system-based approach, one that's specifically designed to create and maintain consistency, especially at scale.
This brings us to the concept of a leadership execution system. Now, this isn't just another program. It's an ongoing operational system. It works by embedding your standards directly into the daily workflow and using things like culture-calibrated AI to provide real-time reinforcement. It basically turns alignment into a continuous function, not a one-time event.
So how does it actually operate? Well, first, it embeds your standards into daily routines. Second, it delivers AI-calibrated guidance right in the flow of work when leaders need it most. Third, it provides systematic reinforcement for the right behaviors in real time. And fourth, it creates total visibility into execution through behavioral data. Now, this model shows how it all comes together. Remember those four human factors, fear, overconfidence, and the rest, that cause drift? This diagram illustrates how a leadership execution system directly counteracts them. It creates this positive feedback loop that constantly pulls behavior back into alignment, essentially making consistency the path of least resistance.
This all sounds good in theory, but the big question remains: how do you make this work when your leaders are spread all over the map? Let's talk about reinforcement across geographies.
And the answer is technology. A technology-enabled system can deliver the exact same support, the same guidance, and the same cultural calibration to every single supervisor, regardless of their location. This completely eliminates the variation you get from having different human facilitators with different styles in different places.
So the specific mechanisms that make this possible are things like
in-the-flow guidance that pops up during key decision-making moments. There's culture-calibrated AI, which makes sure all the guidance is true to your unique organizational values. You have daily execution loops to embed practice and feedback, and it's all based on centralized standards, creating one single source of truth for everyone. Okay, a new way of operating requires a new way of measuring. In a distributed environment, we need to move beyond old-school training metrics and focus on what's actually happening during daily operations.
This table shows that shift in measurement perfectly. On the left, you have traditional metrics like completion rates and satisfaction scores. We're leaving those behind. On the right are the new leadership execution metrics. We're now looking at a behavioral consistency index, reinforcement engagement, cultural alignment, and even early indicators that can predict drift before it becomes a problem. And this new approach gives you a whole new level of visibility. This donut chart breaks down the components of that visibility. You can now see leading indicators of performance, track reinforcement activity, get insights into specific behaviors, and understand routine patterns. You can finally connect the dots between leadership actions and business outcomes.
So let's bring this all home. Why does this matter so much? Because unmanaged execution drift isn't just some soft HR-related issue. It's a significant operational risk with very real, tangible consequences.
When leadership is inconsistent, you get serious business problems. You see compliance gaps because policies aren't applied the same way everywhere. You get variation in quality and service from one team to the next. You get cultural erosion and higher attrition. You see inefficient use of resources, more avoidable escalations, and lower team engagement. Leadership consistency isn't a nice-to-have. It's a fundamental operational control.
The underlying research for this analysis is recorded in the following publications: DOI 10.5281/Zenodo 173-94116, DOI 10.5281/Zenodo 1742556, ORCID 0009-0004 6525 5634.
Published by the Leadership Execution Institute.